Well, thank you all for coming. Yeah, well, we invite thousands and thousands of people. So, I've been doing this town hall format for quite a long time, even before I came to Rockwood, and it just depends. I mean, actually, this is a good sign in a weird way. It's a good sign, meaning it'd be nice that people would want to communicate, but typically in our business, when we have packed board meetings or when we have packed town hall meetings, that means something's wrong. You know, it means something is terribly wrong, and a lot of people want answers. And I'm not suggesting at all that everything's perfect and people don't want answers, but they're a little more trusting of what's going on in the district, and then they can pick up a phone and call if they have questions for me. You don't have to come to a town hall meeting. I'm responsive to telephone calls and emails and such. So. But I thought about that, and of all the years I've been doing them, also any that I have in spring are the least attended. And then I added to it all the sports things going on tonight, and I thought, my gosh, I don't. And then the weather, it's like, my goodness. And you've been around me already. It's like,
I have a different question for you.
Okay,
tonight, so
well that's good. That's
one we didn't cover the other day.
That's a good thing. So anyway, that's how it works. And regardless of how small the crowd is, if we've got good things to talk about, we got good things to talk about, and we'll just talk. And if we want to spend the whole hour, we'll spend the whole hour. If we don't need to, we don't need to. That's totally up to you all. I usually have some kind of background pieces that I can just talk about if nobody has questions. But the idea is that I don't come here with an agenda. The idea is that the agenda is created by the questions that you all ask. So that's the way I like to do it. I can always talk on things that are going on. So, especially when you have 25, 30, maybe 50 people sitting and nobody raises their hand, you got to have some filler, So there's always something in our very large district that I can talk about. So let's just start. Are there specific questions? You already said that you have one. Get it rolling for us.
Since you joined us back as superintendent at Rockwood, you haven't shied away from big projects like the bond issue, tackled some other, not necessarily contentious, but certainly attention-grabbing issues like
Absolutely.
Fields and all that.
Sure.
And it seems like every year there's a question that comes up either at a school level or maybe even higher, and that's around school uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
I just like to hear your 2 cents
Yeah.
on school uniforms. That's
Okay. Yeah, if I repeat the question, it's not, but we do record these and we like to post them and make them accessible to the public. And that's the other thing people know too, as far as attending these. So the question was, if I think you're asking my thoughts on school uniforms. Yeah, it may surprise you a little bit because especially you've been around me a lot and heard a lot of what I have to say, and I'm not actually a big proponent of school uniforms in the public schools. Now, having said that, I don't think it matters because I don't think that, come on in, more people, yay. Come on in. I just don't think that, you really don't see public schools doing that, and part of that is because people pick public schools because it's free choice, it's something that is available to them, and there's the occasional court case out there that people feel that kids' rights are being infringed. The other thing is it depends what you do with uniforms. I mean, there could be cost factors because not all families can afford to have X number of school uniform-like things. Some people think the logical piece is that you should just have a really strict dress code. You have to wear these kinds of pants and these kinds of shirts. The reason it struggles to work in a public environment because, in a private environment, you just kick them out if they don't do those kinds of things. And we're a public school. We're a catch-all. We're what's left for anybody that, I prefer public education. I always did with my kids, and and of course it's my life. So, but some people, you know, feel that, well, I can't afford private, I want to go here. But a lot of people choose public schools for the fact that it is public, it is open, it is free, and we don't judge who comes. We kind of stand on the front porch and welcome anybody that's a resident in our school population. It doesn't matter your background, your heritage, your family, you know, one parent, two parent, no parents, you're homeless, all of that, you're just welcome. And so it just kind of infringes upon that a little bit by saying, well, now we're saying you got to look like this. And I just think that personally, and I'm going to be honest with you on this one, if I were, and I'm a transparent, honest person, so if I were to say to you, I love it and I'm going to get it done, I think I'd be ran out of the district before I got it done. There's way too many folks that would be absolutely against that. I don't think our board would be for it. I think maybe in concept, people are for it, but you know, in the handling of that, like I said earlier, you know, that a private school can just say, oh, just go home. You know, you're out of here. We don't have to. You can go get public education. You can't come here. We're the last catch for kids, so we try not to kick people to the curb, you know, unless there's a dangerous situation or what have you. But I go back to the time of cell phones, you know, and we used to try to be so strict on cell phones, and a lot of that is because they came out of the pager era, and pagers back in the day meant drug deals. I mean, there was a time when if you carried a pager, that meant you were involved in drugs. Now, I don't know how accurate that actually is, but that's what the feeling was. I mean, I'm talking about before people carried cell phones, you know. And I remember when I was a teacher at Marquette High School, and I used to sub as an assistant principal because I was working on my degree in administration. And I remember it was a very strict rule. If a student was caught with a pager, it was 5 days out of school. And there were a lot of kids being suspended for 5 days. A lot of kids being suspended for 5 days because kids at that time, pagers were a thing. They're not going to stop carrying their pagers. They may put them in their pockets and then hope that nobody sees them. But then there's always the teacher that's, you know, they feel like it's the rules. I got to be like the Gestapo. And I think I saw a pager. You go to the office, 5 days gone. And that ramped up as cell phones got more popular. And at some point in time, we had to say, we're trying to educate kids, and highly paid administrators spending a lot of time kicking kids out of school because they have electronic devices, and we've got to figure out a way to embrace that. So fortunately, the idea of smartphones has kind of helped that because we can pull those electronic devices into, you know, a curricular meaning. Kids can use them, they're handheld. We have bring your own device policy in our school. So I kind of connect it to that a little bit. It's just the ability to manage that in a public school. Wow, it's tough. Now I'm going to tell you one school that pulled it off. And, although I don't think they're still entirely doing it. Riverview Gardens. Riverview Gardens, just in part of their turnaround, trying to really get respect back to the school and back to the community. They've done some amazing things, and you know, it works there. How long it's going to work there, I don't know. But I think it's a different scenario, a different situation with what all they've gone through. I mean, they were kind of at a point where they had to do anything and everything that was different to make, you know, to make the school a different place. So, anyway.
So I have an actual just comment. So we're here 2.5 years into the St. Louis community, into the Rockwood.
From where?
From Houston.
Oh, wow.
And as you moved into middle schools, they did have codes, which means they really wanted the children. They knew that that was a really tricky time frame. So they did have, you may call it strict or not strict. But
Dress codes? Yeah.
So when I came here and they let the girls wear, you know, it was kind of like very interesting with the spaghetti straps and the short, you know, they're fashionable, the shorts that everybody's wearing, but that was all prohibited, and the children were required through that public school district in the NASA NASA, meaning space shuttle,
Right.
Clear Lake Bay area side of town. And maybe it's just a culture, but there was like no issues with it. Everybody felt like at that middle school at least, they wanted to, as these brains are growing and changing, that there was a standard. It was only that middle school where they had some really strict, everybody had to wear collars, they didn't care what color it was, and everything you had to be able to kind of touch at the knee.
Yeah, kind of, we've done that before too, that your hands should touch down.
I mean, it wasn't strict, like we all had to wear white and khaki like private, but I really think that was a sense of, like you said, respect and just keeping the standards just very high of what they expected in the classroom.
Sure.
But we know this is Blue Ribbon, and it's different, but I guess it works. But my follow-up is, coming from Houston, how do you rate Rockwood beyond the academics in terms of inclusiveness? How do you define inclusiveness, not diversity, inclusiveness, and then how do you rate the district, and what type of things can you do to improve what I consider inclusiveness? And I don't really feel that it's a very inclusive environment.
Okay.
Particularly
Well,
with transplants and even people who have ethnic differences.
Sure.
And I live 63005, so I'm not commuting in.
Yeah.
Which we didn't know when we saw on paper that it was 25% diversity. We thought, wow, what a very, it's just like Houston, this could be so diverse. And then we learned something about, I don't know, DSEG, or I don't know what this stuff is here, but we got names for it.
Right.
But we didn't realize that that was all part of the
St. Louis area,
And
right.
it's really interesting. So can you speak
Sure.
to inclusiveness?
Yeah, so let me make sure that you got it, I'm probably close enough. So, and I may have to ask for clarification when you say inclusiveness, because I want to make sure, you said not regarding diversity, but
Well, diversity in thought and valuing differences in learning styles, valuing differences in not ethnic background, but culture.
Sure.
So there could be two people who actually look alike that may be from two totally different cultures.
Right.
For example, one might be American and one might be from Germany, but we both have brown skin.
Sure.
So, and we're both not from St. Louis. So it could be just the culture of this area, but I just feel in the schools, from the staff on down, I just don't really feel a sense of, as a parent, inclusiveness.
Okay.
They live here, so.
Yeah, and we've used words like, being inclusive in this area has had a lot to do with special needs over the years. Students, I mean, we have kind of like the VIC program, the DSEG program, similar to that. Our special school district is unique in the St. Louis area, and I don't know if you know that, but the special school district of St. Louis County is embedded in all St. Louis County school districts. So there's really two school districts partnering regarding special needs. That has a lot to do with being inclusive of students with special needs. And instead of the old days, when I was young, I had a special needs brother, his only option to go to school was to go to the special school, away from kids that didn't have the physical or emotional special needs or intellectual special needs that certain kids have. So now we're very inclusive in our education with special needs. But it's interesting to hear your perspective. And I've never left St. Louis. Okay, I've vacationed out of St. Louis, but I mean, I grew up here. I went to school in St. Louis. A little small school district in South St. Louis County called Bayless. And all of my degrees are from St. Louis, Webster University, Lindenwood University, St. Louis University, and I've worked in the Windsor School District, the Rockwood School District, Parkway School District, and the Melville School District. So all of that St. Louis. And it depends on the school that you're in. Can you remind me what school you're?
Chesterfield Elementary and Rockwood Valley. Live right down the street.
Yes.
63005.
Sure.
We've lived in Delaware, we've lived in Houston, we've lived in the Midwest, and suburban Detroit,
Yeah.
and this is just extremely different.
Yeah.
Just as a parent, it's just really kind of frustrating too.
Wow. Well, obviously, I mean, my theory on that is that we are an inclusive school district. We should be an inclusive school district. Of course, we don't control the diversity that we have. I mean, that's relative to the community and who lives there, so on and so forth. We do gladly participate in the VIC program. That is voluntary. Nothing is required, and to be honest with you, for a lot of, it's kind of split, but there's a lot of taxpayers in the community from a financial standpoint that don't agree with it because they think that, you know, we're actually getting reimbursed a flat, it's $7,250 per student from the state. Next year it'll be $7,000 because the program's kind of on a phase-out mode over many years. And we spend a lot more than that per student. So there's a lot of taxpayers that say, that's not a good thing. We do it because we embrace the additional diversity that it brings, you know, to make our schools be a little more of a cross-section of what the world looks like. But that's one small example of how we somewhat can control a little of that by bringing a little more you know, diversity and a little more opportunity for our St. Louis City students. And depending where you're at in the Rockwood School District, there are some very diverse schools. Chesterfield, in that area, there's actually a pretty heavy Middle Eastern population. If you go over to Wild Horse, right down the street, you've got a pretty significant Middle Eastern population in that building, and a lot of people are surprised to hear that. There is a pretty saturated Mexican community area in that area too, but that doesn't touch all of our schools. So I think we embrace the diversity that we have. I think that our, you know, the way we approach education, and you may have to give me some examples of your frustration.
The curriculum. I mean, the curriculum, but also, so when we first got here from Texas, the first thing my son noticed was, like, even, we had no science labs. So we had art in Texas, we had an art lab that you rotated through, PE, music, and actually science labs. The kids rotated through the blacktops, kindergarten to fifth. So that was the first thing he noticed. Where's our hands-on science labs? You know, like, well, I'm not sure. So it was a rotation. Yeah. Second thing I noticed was the actual, not just staff, faculty was not very representative of the world we live in. Maybe it's representative of the zip code, but in order for children to have a true perspective, it would be nice to see a little bit more in terms of diversity, even not just from the principal on down to the lunchroom, you know, the janitorial services. It just brings for a better perspective, particularly, and I know you said it's phasing out, but particularly when you have children who are spending 45 minutes to get somewhere, and then they just don't see anyone until if I show up, it's like everybody else, I'm Dr. Pryor, is going on, you know, you know, so I'm like, you know, I'm not saying it's bad. The education these guys have received has been, you know,
well,
very pleased with that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you one bit, and I can tell you and look you in the eye and tell you from my heart of hearts that it is our intent to have as diverse of a staff as we can. Of course, we're limited to the people that apply for our jobs, and of course we always, in those applications, we're going to consider what our needs are and the best we can get, and sometimes that brings us the ability to be diverse in our staff. But even with leadership, the schools that you're giving an example of, if you were at this school, our head principal here is of Middle Eastern descent. We do have African American administrators throughout the district. Is it equal to or representative of the world? Probably not, and definitely not in the teaching staff. But it is something that we're very interested in. I'm not going to disagree with you at all. I mean, we would like that to be different, and we're cognizant of that. Our HR department is cognizant of that, and we go to, you know, do participate in job fairs, and we try to recruit and change that to the best of our ability. But back, your comment about, again, that's why I said we need to understand inclusiveness, because you start talking about the curriculum and relative to like science labs and such.
Inclusiveness in terms of ideas of what, so maybe that's the wrong term, but just a holistic view of what should be included as well in an educational experience that's going to lead them to broader things outside of St. Louis. So even the curriculum and how you fully integrate different perspectives of the teaching styles of curriculum that's not necessarily always traditional.
Yeah.
But that's probably a whole nother discussion.
It's a lengthy
It's a
discussion,
long one
and I'm more than glad to talk about it.
It's just different, I don't know.
I've been talking a lot lately about the idea of educating the 21st century student, and we are definitely pushing in the direction. We're ramping up all of our STEM related curricular pieces. We've got some heavy components in the secondary schools. We're trying to introduce more into the elementary schools. I will tell you, and this may be something you're glad to hear, or it may frustrate you more, but a few years back, because of there were some budget situations in the school district, there were some unity problems between the taxpayers and the voters in the schools. They could not pass ballot measures, and curriculum was put on hold. So for a good number of years, curriculum wasn't, I'm not going to say it wasn't a focus, but it was kind of what was in place, and there's probably more teacher autonomy in what was going on and how it was being utilized more as a resource. We have ramped that back up, and we are cycling through, revisiting and rewriting our curricular pieces, and we're pulling more experiential pieces in. I've been talking a lot about that lately. Our view of the future is, personally, if I had it my way, you can't make this happen overnight, but the entire experience of K-12 would be experiential, would be kids hands-on, project-based, innovative. But that's the direction that I'm forging the district to move in, because I think that's the 21st century, Now, part of your first question, what do I think about the district? I know very, very much about districts in the state of Missouri and around here, and again, I don't know how it makes you feel to say this, but I think we're pretty progressive, in the Midwest. The Midwest tends to catch up to the East Coast and the West Coast, who are very progressive and aggressive in their things, but the Midwest is a little slower with that and has to kind of see the tried and true things, and we have a lot of politics that enter into education here, which is really the flavor of the country right now. A lot of politicians trying to make decisions about education. People that don't know a whole lot about education, are in those political seats a lot of times. But you have something like Common Core standards, and it comes through, and that sparks a conversation. And it became politicized to a point where you could never even really discuss what it was. Believe it or not, a lot of the idea of Common Core was exactly what you just talked about. But that got buried in all the politics of it, and it's this person's idea, and they're a forced governmental program, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to get into that because Missouri rejected it, and are in the process of finalizing their own standards, which guess what? They're going to look almost exactly like Common Core.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I got to jump in there. There's a lot of, there'll be some of that, like I said, might be a good segue. It's just like, it's my heart pounding for the Common Core stuff. But people don't really know what's behind it, and you start doing the research and you understand kind of what it is, and it's frustrating that it's so hard to find out what it is. And it was originally started by the Bill Gates Foundation, and it was not educators getting together the federal government came to the governors and said, if you want to receive your money because you are not going to meet your No Child Left Behind waivers, then you have to agree to do it our way if you want your money, in a nutshell. Would you concur?
To some degree. That's what Glenn Beck will tell you on the radio anyway.
Well, governor here in Missouri signed and said, sure, we'll do them. They were not written. They were not tested. Nobody knew what these were, and they were already agreed that we will adopt them.
In theory.
So how do we measure excellence?
Well, so what actually,
Or what's pleasing?
yeah,
You have to, again, I have a PhD in engineering, so we have to measure where we are, and then we have to have statistical way to say we've improved. And if
and
we
those
can
are all-
statistically say that we put some systems in place, whatever that means, the subject is the student.
Right.
Right.
You've got a starting point, and then you've got a place you want to be in terms of improvement. And statistically, you have to show that you've done it, and that's how you measure success,
Right.
either from a profitability, from a productivity, from any type of projects that we work on. We have to be able to statistically say we've made that shift. So I don't know where to go.
So I guess the argument comes down to who gets to set those standards. Is it us as parents? Is it?
No standards, you just know where you are, and you have a process.
Standards are deceiving.
This
Right.
might be a good
Yeah.
point to talk about the changes. Well, there's budget issues, right? It costs a lot of money to implement a lot of the Common Core tech, because it was very much what you were talking about was technologically based. So in terms of your setting your foundations of where you're starting and where you're going to, and then the dynamic testing that was going on. So there was a lot of things I think that were embedded in that. Take away the Common Core, and then you're testing and evaluating children's learning potential, capacity, past experience, propensity to learn over a period of time. A lot of those things were some positive things I thought that could have come out of that, whether it was Common Core based or whether it was roll your own version of curriculum. But that, to get to your point, and the district has gone to and moved to a lot of those things over the last few years with computerized testing.
Well, I mean, a lot of that, you have to realize we're accredited by our state. Not all states are. In fact, Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education strives to be what they call the top 10, one of the top 10 states in the year 2020. And we as superintendents throughout the state have pushed back a lot on that because, first of all, I get tired of the contest-like mentality, the whole test score, which is, a little different than what you're talking about. I'm talking about the big test, print them in the paper the next day, and let's decide what school district is the best. Doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it tells us a lot. You can get the same results by looking at zip codes. Zip codes will tell you just as much about school districts, and whether people want to believe it or not, and I try to humble our staff on this all the time, good zip codes usually house good schools, and that's because you have, it's more affluent, and you have resources for the children, families have resources for the children, and you don't have the barriers that impoverished districts have. And yet we have this accreditation system. I started to say the whole top 10 and 20 thing. As superintendents, we said, well, let's go take a look at the top 10 states in the United States and see what they're doing. Out of the top 10 states in the United States, only one of those states is actually accrediting their schools. The rest of them are still like North Central accreditation, which we got rid of. Anyway, that's the political mess. Even, and I don't mean this with any defense, but even the conversation about Common Core is the political mess that gets in the way of education doing what education needs to do for children.
Totally agree.
I've said from the get-go, when people would get upset about Common Core, I'd say it's not going to affect the Rockwood School District any differently because we've got our own standards that we create locally. Of course, we're required to align to state standards. Yes, we are. But there's nothing in there. I mean, the idea of Common Core was to raise the bar, you know, in theory. And I was at a meeting the other day, and some gentleman tried to go down. Every time I turn around, I hear the math examples and all this. The intent of Common Core, without the politics, was to teach our kids to think, not to, exactly what you were talking about earlier. To be an engineer, you got to be able to think. It's more than just adding the numbers together. It's the theory and the practice behind why those numbers add together and what they do and how they do that. That was the intent of Common Core. The other intent of Common Core was to have some standardization across our country. So in this contest-like environment we live in, if we're responsible for our kids, if you didn't come from Houston, but you came from, I'm going to randomly pick on a state, not intentionally, but Kansas, and their standards were very, very low, and yet we inherit those children where we're at, and then we're responsible for their testing the next time. So if you start looking at the practicality of what the concept of Common Core was, and that it wasn't this idea that somebody had an agenda about teaching these specific things that were going to pollute the minds of children, and it just gets crazy, the conversation and all the politics. But politics got involved and started ripping it apart and finding every criticism. And depending on what side of it you're on, and depending on what you listen to, your paradigm can go in that direction. Whatever you allow your brain to be, filled with. And I keep trying to tell people at the end of the day, first of all, Missouri rejected it.
That just means that they didn't purchase the copyrighted Common Core state standards, but when Missouri writes them, they will align to that. So if it says students shall know numbers 0 through 10, maybe Missouri says students will be able to write numbers 0 to 10. So I think it gets into semantics, and that's what's so frustrating as a parent. I want it to be spoken about in an honest way. You need to look at both sides. You need to look at everything. Even with good intentions, there's unintended bad consequences to it. And it's just been hard when my experience in looking at it and doing the research, and I do not know everything. First, I have a lot to learn, but it's the frustrating thing that it gets said that we're doing this for the kids, and it's not Rockwood. I'm just saying in general, when people say we have kids, it's best interest for them, but things get pushed through, and it's not in their best interest. The test that was given last year was not Dr. Knost's decision. It's Missouri said, here's what you all will do. It was not a validated test in many different ways. Scores, now we're not doing it. It was a different test back in 2014. They did a different test 2015. It will be a different test this year. Missouri had from June to October to create it. It will be field tested after the kids take the test. That's why it will take, but that's not said. What is said is this will be great for our schools. We'll have it, and it's not Rockwood. It's not.
I don't know who's saying that. Not in the education world. Nobody's thrilled about any of that.
Right.
And even in the, but again, it's too much time is spent thinking about it, because in the Rockwood School District, it's not going to negatively impact our kids. It's probably not going to be positively impacting our kids either. And so much time and energy, because it's a party decision. It's a political party decision. Doesn't mean always, but 9 out of 10 times, if you're conservative, you're anti-Common Core, because that's the rhetoric of where the negativity tends to come. Doesn't mean that there are non-conservative people that are. There's mixed, but predominantly that's the political end of things. If you listen to the Republican speeches, it's going to be heavy, not only anti-Common Core, pretty anti-public education. Our school systems stink, and compared to the rest of the world, all this other industrialized nations, which they don't, there's so much, talk about a dishonest conversation. That is such a dishonest conversation. Yeah, but I challenge people all the time because they listen to rhetoric about comparing. Well, how come we're lagging so far behind? Why are we lagging so far behind? Finland and Singapore and all that. That's comparing apples to oranges. You can't. In fact, we have 24% child poverty rate in the United States. That's the highest child poverty rate compared to any other industrialized nation. If you adjust for that poverty rate, the United States flies high. And the only data, speaking of data, the only data that they use to compare school districts in the country is the PISA, which is a randomized test given to 15-year-olds. I've never even known a child that's taken it.
But there is something to say about understanding other cultures. And
Absolutely.
Because my boss, actually, I was working with somebody in Finland, so
Mhm.
I've been there, and I know that in Finland, the divorce rate is 50%. So most women, even my boss, is a single mom. But it's just the whole, just style, I use the word, it is semi-socialist, socialism. Because
Yeah.
people believe that everybody has that right to that equal.
They believe in their
education.
public schools.
And they believe in that, and they spend, their taxes are crazy high, which is totally different.
And they barely test their kids.
All right, and they,
There's no
don't
standardized
test,
testing.
They don't, yeah, so I don't believe in testing. I don't believe.
I think we're all kind of on that
I
side.
mean, yeah, I think we're all on the same page, because as someone, I believe in understanding data, and each individual child
Yeah.
has a profile and a
Right.
data sheet
So-
that should be looked at and say, what's that growth of
Right,
that child? Now, that's expensive to do, that's why some people go into really high-end,
Yeah.
private schools, which I'm not that impressed with. But, anyway.
But we're doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
If you study at all response to intervention, RTI, have you read much on what that is? It's a very individualized model that starts very young in the elementary schools. It's very prescriptive, and it's all data driven. It's data to inform instruction, not data to accredit a school. And it's tracking students and predicting students, not for the student to hang on the refrigerator, informing instruction on where we need to go. Where were we at the beginning of the year? Where are we in 2 months? Where are we in 2 months after that? And the idea of kind of tiered interventions. 80.
If you understand the data, because they came and brought me a 7-day year for 2 years, a year, 18 months of this kid. When they showed me the data, I said, statistically, this is some noise going on. So something else is going on. So I can look at the data and say, there's something else. And then through a lot of parent engagement, we were able to put the right package together.
Sure.
But, I mean, I don't know if every parent gets access or even request or even know the request, but look at all this, and if you add it all, they might not know what to do with it, because this is.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true.
This is something saying something else, and I need to understand what's going on. What is this saying? What that means.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, but.
Not every parent's a statistician.
Right.
So, but again, it's really designed to inform the instruction. It's designed to inform the instruction, and that goes back to, again, more politics, where the politics want to push in the direction of not only does a teacher inform instruction, but you're going to be held accountable for the growth of your children and be judged accordingly. And
So let me go back to this.
do we want to answer his question?
Okay, hold on 1 second. So let me tell you one thing. So
He's
back
very
to this
patient.
Middle school thing, 1 second. In middle school, they actually had an opt-out. So every child coming from 5th grade going to 6th were what they call pre-AP. The parent actually had to opt them out if they did not want them in what we call accelerated. So the district they came from, Clear Lake Bay Area, Clear Creek, ISD, all students going into 6th grade would all be placed in
Higher track.
At higher track. And the only way you could be opted out as a parent. I'm not going to ask you to respond to that today,
I will.
but I do actually have issues with not everybody and having a parent opt out.
Yeah.
So why do you put everybody in general versus stretching them and putting everybody up and letting the parent make the decision that I don't want my child
accelerated. So everybody is registered in acceleration.
Mhm.
And the parents get the opportunity to say, I know my child.
Yeah.
80% of them leave them there, and the kids rise to the occasion.
Right.
So it drives up a whole nother standard in that particular district. And the standards here are high and great,
Mhm.
and Blue Ribbon's still great. But I just, rhetorical question, why is it not done that way?
Yeah, first of all, I think that the success of something like that largely depends a lot on demographics. There are areas around the country where that does work, but if you take a really close look, there are some socioeconomic pieces that connect with that. The other thing is it costs a lot of money, because a lot of times the support they have, people that just funnel kids all into the upper track, there's got to be, we've done some examples of that. We've had like algebra A-B type stuff where there's another portion of algebra for the added support for kids that are having struggling to stay up on that upper track. But it's a paradigm shift. It's not something that in the state of Missouri or really in the Midwest has been done in a comprehensive public school. You find it in private schools. You find it in exclusive schools. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know the district.
In the district of Bassett where it sits, but.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know the specifics of that district, but it's something we talk about a lot. I've had that conversation. Advanced placement courses are really popular in our area because you get college credit if you score 3 on that AP exam. It's nationally normed and da 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 da. And I've had that question before. A lot of even AP is rote memorization, but it gets that college credit. But there's things that I've seen in AP courses that, especially the experiential stuff, the hands-on lab stuff, that I think any kid of any functioning cognitive level could benefit from this. In fact, would probably benefit more from the experiential piece of doing it and the takeaways of learning from doing than they do trying to memorize in a book and regurgitate on paper. But it goes back to the politics of the system that we somewhat are always chasing our tail, because no matter how far we start to get away from the traditional test score or credit and more innovative, and I think we are heavily moving in that direction, but we can't let go of that. Because if I lost accreditation, first of all, I'd be run out of town, and second of all, the population in Rockwood would start dropping significantly. People would stop buying houses here. So it's that cyclical thing that the politics of it keeps people pulled in, and the political dialogue keeps people attached to the almighty test score. Even people that are against it, they still want to look at the paper and see how they're doing. Don't want my kid there, put my kid there, one more here. And it's only about how they filled in bubbles on a test, So, but it's interesting, because the same people that are opposed to it tend to be for the things that keep us in it, So, but the good news is, I think, and I've been around education almost 30 years, and I see that we are forging a new path. I'm also part of the superintendent group in the state. Our accreditation tool is called MSIP, Missouri School Improvement Program. We've had 5 cycles of it. We are in the process of writing the 6th cycle. And for the first time in the history of that program, we have a commissioner that is engaging the school officials in that concept. And we are much more interested in getting into that idea of experiential learning, more outcomes-based, which sounds like standards, because we always want accountability. We never want to say we don't want accountability, but it's how we're accountable that we're more interested in. So I think there are changes, but there's no doubt about it. You're in a different part of the country and you're seeing things differently. I will still maintain that you're in a wonderful school district. there's a lot of things you're noticing, and we could probably talk about a lot of those things all night long, and you and I could have future conversations, which you're always welcome to call and talk or come by and visit. But I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we're looking at the right things. All the things that you're interested in, I am, we are. We have some examples that are greater than others throughout the district. We are still attached to that traditional piece because we're still required to be attached to it, but we're getting more and more innovative in what we do. You know, we've had examples at Rockwood Summit High School, an example of a biodiesel program that we connected with Monsanto with a grant. Kids, we've got a truck down there, the kids are growing the crops and creating the biodiesel fuel. At Lafayette High School, we just constructed a greenhouse that is going to be part of that experiential piece of kids, and we actually did that with with our special needs kids in mind, to you know, kids that may not have opportunities after high school, but it will benefit any and all kids that are involved in that. We've got our STEM mobile lab that we've put together for the elementary schools that's going around, and our robotics programs are growing. We're cataloging the experiential pieces, and we're really trying to forge, and that's my vision for the district, is that we get more and more experiential in how we teach and how we learn. What is your question, young man? You have got, shake my hand, you have got to be he is the most patient. Yes. It's going to be the best question all night, too.
So, in my school, we're doing the argumentative writing piece about something school related, and one of the things I'm writing about is why does elementary and middle school, some middle school, but elementary, most importantly, have sports team, don't have sports team.
Mm-hmm. Boy, that's a great question. Did you hear that?
I did, actually.
So the question is why, basically, he's basing it on an assignment that he's doing in school, an argumentative piece, but he's asking why elementary schools, especially middle schools as well, don't have organized sports teams. Elementary schools in the state of Missouri, public schools, never have, as long as I've ever known. There've always been, you know, club-like sports, community sports. We have a expansive community education program that kids can get involved, and we're actually partnering with Parkway now in that. We used to have junior high schools. When I taught in Rockwood many years ago, we had junior high schools, and we had sports programs in the junior highs. But when there was a conversion to middle schools, organized sports in middle schools were not part of the concept of the middle school education. So, like, not only Rockwood, all districts went away from organized team sports, and they have intramurals, you know, and opportunities for kids to be involved that way. And there's little feeder programs that are kind of like clubs that feed our high schools. But part of it's philosophy and theory about, you know, from the past, kind of a little bit on the traditional side. And the other part is that, you know, let's just say in Rockwood we wanted to do that now. Let's say we wanted to have organized sports in middle school. It's going to take money. The taxpayers are going to have to say, okay, we'll add more money to do that. And then, do you need to take off?
Yeah, we gotta pick kids.
Do you have any questions you want to ask on the way out the door? Okay, you do that.
Yeah.
We've talked before.
We've talked,
Yes,
and I'm
yes.
really just talking, you know, getting more, paying more attention and want to have a bit of a voice about some things.
Okay,
Just to see where it stands and where it sits within the big program.
sure. Oh, I'd love to talk about that, yeah.
Okay, there's one question I've asked you before, and I really don't like to answer because it's vague to me.
Okay. Well, tell me I'm being vague and I'll make sure I'm not being vague. I never intend to be vague.
Well, no, it wasn't you, it's just
Oh.
the answer I got at that given point in time.
I got
At
it.
a different meeting, I think it was a hair stuff.
Okay.
And I just wanted to get a clearer answer. With things
I'll be-
changing and evolving the way they are now,
Yeah,
I want to get more involved into this, you know,
Sure.
for the kids and for myself as
Yeah.
a parent, because the next parents are coming in.
sure.
Likewise, so.
I'd be glad to talk Vic
Thank you
with
so
you.
much, I
Yes,
appreciate it.
you
Thank you
bet.
guys.
Thanks for coming. Anyway, the other thing is, let's say that the taxpayer said, yeah, put a ballot issue on, we'll fund the money to start up sports and get all the equipment, all the coaches, all that we need, then who would we play?
There's schools, like the Rockland
Oh,
School.
so just compete in the Rockwood? Well, that's kind of what our community ed program does. That's kind of what our community ed program does. It's just kind of, and now it's expanded to the Parkway District, so there's a little more with that. But there's not organized sports in any of the middle schools, really throughout the state.
Isn't it? Because I thought Ladunes and the Parkways had their teams that are out.
No, they've got teams like we do that are organized outside of the school and
Okay.
use the school facilities and such like that. But they don't have teams that are funded.
So they have, okay.
They're not funded by the school district, like, you know.
So none in the state of Missouri or just in Missouri? I don't know.
No,
It's different.
You know, is it exactly that way across the state? There could be some that are still doing some things in the rural areas, but by and large, again, it was not part of the philosophy of middle school education back when there was a push in that direction.
But again, I agree, disagree with you, that I don't want to spend my money there. Because
Yeah.
if I want to play, it's so competitive anyway,
Yeah,
that, I mean, what's the point?
right.
We'd love to have the pep clubs and the cheerleaders at school and all that, like I did growing up.
Yeah.
You did.
What's that?
Yeah.
I didn't have to, because I haven't been home.
Because you're doing community
Yeah.
service and doing, giving back. You're in the city.
What else do you have?
I just wanted to piggyback kind of on the school uniform, just at school, just for thought, thinking, it does, I think, raise the standard, kind of, you can't come to work someday just however you want. This is part of our role, and this is what you know, live up to, this is what's expected of you. Also, looking at other districts nationwide, not even for this reason, but came across, like, if it is free, and why couldn't there be more of a parent choice? I think Hazelwood tried it a couple years ago, maybe a decade ago. Here's a traditional school. If you'd like to send your child to this traditional school, this is how this traditional school will be run in the Rockwood District. You will sign a behavior code, a dress code. You will have a uniform, and it can be the parent's choice. Or if particular parents, because Rockwood being so big, from 270 to 44 to, I mean, you just have such a vast area. If parents in that one school said, we would like school uniforms at our school, would that be something that could be entertained, or?
You know, that probably sounds a little easier on the surface than it does, because here's, first of all, where are we putting that school? Is it in one of our buildings that we have? And you think, okay, well, that'd probably be easiest. Put it in one of the buildings we have, create this. But then you have to redistrict the entire district, because that population of kids that don't want to go there, they have to go somewhere. So we are very much in Rockwood, people believe in community schools. We have neighborhood elementary schools. And you know, we talked earlier about people not showing up at meetings like this. I tell the board all the time, they say, I wonder how we can get more people to our board meetings. I said, redistrict. When you redraw boundaries in a school district, we will, in fact, that's before my time, you all have seen this room filled when those discussions happen. So that's one sticking point. You would have to go through some very uncomfortable things to get there, I think, to the point where the interest in such an idea would be diminished so much. Now, are there people out there that agree that with some of that traditional mindset of you know, a uniform school and traditional, all that? I think so, but I don't know that the concept of how to get there, you know, what that would look like. And, you know, I've been at a lot of schools throughout my life. I mean, you know, again, not only through working, but my observing and educating, and I had travel. I lived in other places, but I've visited school districts elsewhere in the country. And, you know, by and large, are there some examples of how kids dress that I'm not comfortable with? Yes. And more often than not, if I point that out to administrators, or if administrators see it, it is dealt with. But you know, I can't stand out here at Crestview, and this is me, and we may be different, but I can't stand here in this lobby and watch kids walking through and go, that one's dressed disgracefully, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. It's, you know, I really have to search for that. Yeah, straps and such like that. If that's what you're talking about, you know, that's not all that strict. I mean, typically we do say that is the rule, that, you know, your fingers shouldn't be lower. But the other thing too, in this day and age of, you know what taxpayers don't realize? How much of their money goes to attorneys. I mean, we are sued all the time, you know, or threatened suits, you know, I should say threatened, we don't necessarily get, but we do have lawsuits that are brought against us. We have to engage lawyers about everything we do, and about the interpretation of policies and such, and the freedoms that are the rights that our kids have, because we are a public school. So some of those are very, very difficult conversations, and also it's really hard. I can't even eloquently talk about it, but being a lifelong public educator that believes in public education, even things that I struggle with that kids may come to school with, whether it's a mindset or whether it's something that I'm troubled by what they're used to and what they think is okay, or how they've been taught, or what they believe in, or how they dress. A lot of those things, it comes down to this in a public school. If you want to totally control it, you got to be willing to kick kids out. You got to be willing to, first of all, take on the lawsuits. Second of all, just tell children, this is public school, this is your last choice, and you can't afford anything else. You can't go here because you don't believe the way we believe, your parents don't believe the way we believe. Those are just tough, you know, layers to peel back and get to the middle of, and then still have an effective community, unified school that people believe in and rally around, that honors diversity. And honoring diversity, you can't say I honor diversity in maybe what people look like or their socioeconomics or where they come from. You also have to honor diversity in how they think.
Yep.
And you have to know, it's kind of like when people say, you know, always, it cracks me up when I hear these comments on social media where people, this is the one I hear all the time. People will post a Pledge of Allegiance, and then they'll say underneath there, remember when we used to be able to say this in school? When did we stop saying it in schools? I mean, the Pledge of Allegiance, or people say, well, they don't say, in God we trust. Yes, we do. We say it before a board meeting, stand in this room every time. Our kids get up in our schools and say it. So there's these ideas that people have that they perpetuate that they don't really understand in schools. But when you protect freedom of religion, for instance, people say, you know, I say, oh, well, kids can't carry Bibles. Yes, they can. No kid has ever gotten in trouble for carrying a Bible. No kid ever got in trouble for praying at lunch. You know, if they did, it was an isolated case. But to protect the freedom of religion, you have to protect the freedom of all religions. And that's where some people struggle when they judge public schools. They, you know, well, they want the freedom of this religion protected because it's what theirs is, but to be protecting all religions. So public schools are a mashup of a lot of different cultural, you know, diverse mindsets and people coming from all walks of life, and to operate that in an effective manner and try to do what's good for all and bring them along is anything but easy, but that should always be the focus. And that's why when you first asked, where my head went with inclusive.
And that's where I am at the end of, right
Yes.
at the end of it, because that's where I'm ultimately wanting.
And that's what we want to.
The opportunity for have openness and a respect
Yeah.
for the differences in how we think about the system
Right.
and how it should
I
function.
agree with you.
Just
I
a
agree.
respect for the differences in mindset and differences in views, and respect for that, meaning everybody can
Yeah.
have that respectful difference.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great summary of what ultimately I would want
Yeah.
when I say inclusiveness.
I'm with
So,
you.
oh my God.
I'm with you.
That's
Yeah.
ultimately what you want.
I really think that people that don't, that's really what the concept of of private schools and parochial schools came from. I mean, parochial on the end of it is that you had a specific religion that you wanted your children exposed to around their core curriculum and elective curriculum, and then just private in general is that it's going to be based on a very specific doctrine of something, whether it's religious or just traditional thought, and that's where you can send your kid. But it just to make a public school that way,
Yeah,
tough.
when I think of it, like a uniform or dress code, I don't even think of it in terms of, so it's good to hear the discussion as far as, oh, they can't dress like this, they can't look like this. I'm thinking this age and beyond of, let's take the peer pressure out, let's level in their minds, I just look like so-and-so, and they look like me, instead of, I'm not thinking about math, I'm thinking, wish I had those shoes. I don't look good, she looks so much better than I do. And their minds are so much on that, it's like, let's take that pressure, let's take that burden, let's take that off.
Actually, that's why they did it at the middle school, exactly what you said, they wanted to take out that whole.
And we spend so
social-
much on character education, you gotta do this, and it all comes down to, but your identity is how you present yourself. It's like a, kind of a mixed message, I would think, for the kids.
well, we definitely don't teach that.
Right.
You know, we
but-
definitely don't teach that. I get what you're saying, but
That's kind of where my mind would go with the uniforms more than,
I really
here's the way
wonder.
everybody should look. I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
She said, are you asking me these questions for a certain reason? And I said, no, I'm just curious about what your opinion is.
Yeah.
She's in 7th grade.
Yeah.
And I said, so if someone said to you, we're gonna have a uniform, what would that look like in your mind? And, would you sign up for that? Or would you say, no way, I wanna wear my, what I wanna wear every day? And she said, well, maybe we could wear what we wanted on Friday, but I'd sign up for a cute little plaid skirt.
Because she did talk about how, there is a lot of, probably more so with girls,
Yeah,
maybe than
girls.
boys, but around what girls wear and popularity and that transcends across the different, cliques in school. And she said, and for boys too, those Nike socks cost about $17, $18 a pair. And so she said, they cost, that's a lot of money, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm glad your socks don't cost, So when you think about an economic discussion that you might have about the cost of your uniform versus the cost that I as a parent go out and spend for my kids' school clothes, that half of them they don't wear because they say they will, but then they don't, versus you've got, your skirt or your pants, or you've got, kind of a choice of 5 different outfits that are all part of what your uniform might be. And maybe it's a Crestview Middle School sweatshirt, or maybe it's a Lafayette High School hoodie. So there's I wouldn't sign up for something that makes them all look like they've gone to Ascension,
Yeah.
parish school or whatever. But it's just something that, I toy back and forth, and part of it as a parent, you think, I like that they make their own choices, and part of growing up is learning what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, whether that's how short your shorts are. Part of it as a parent, you gotta stay engaged, and you can't just let your kids wear whatever they want to, just because they want to. But part of it is, it's an easy thing, as a parent. You got your sweatshirt, I'm not gonna argue with you about it. I mean, so it's a
There is, and
broad
you
conversation.
can-
Yeah, and you can get into so.
You can.
many
It's so deep because
It
I
is.
can even psychoanalyze some of the things that have been said. I mean, you made the comment about in the workplace, you can't necessarily wear whatever you want. But I guarantee you, in the workplace, there are going to be people that wear suits that cost $2,000 and people that bought a suit at Walmart. So you're still going to have that pressure of looking like the other person.
Right, but
And the other piece that I struggle with is it's kind of how our medical field treats things now. People have an ailment, they immediately want to figure out how to mask the ailment instead of getting to the root of the ailment. And not all kids, I don't believe all kids, and I'm a father too, and I'm a father of daughters, I don't believe all kids are sitting looking at that kid next to them saying, I wish I had those shoes, or I wish I looked like that, or I wish I had to do that. So I think it's not only identifying that there are others, and maybe there's teachable moments in that idea that kids realize that there are differences, but if a kid is feeling that pressure, that's what we got to get to the bottom of, is that pressure piece. But I don't think the pressure comes, I think that's the surface level, is the pressure coming from that person has on some really expensive shoes, but where does the pressure come from that somebody feels like, I got to have those shoes? I think that's maybe a little difference.
Well,
Yes. She had her hand up. Yeah.
Why do middle school start so early, and then how do we get early start days?
Why don't you get early start days? What do you mean by that?
My friend, she's in the Parkway District, and sometimes instead of half days where you get out earlier, they start later but get out at their
Yeah, and Parkway's done it both ways. In every district I've been in, and Rockwood's done it both ways. And the bad thing about being a school district that listens to the community, whatever you do over time eventually is going to get enough opposition to where you listen and then you end up changing what you do. But let's start with the early start times. We're a large school district. We're on 3 tiers of buses. That means every school bus driver for our district drives 3 tiers. They drive an elementary tier, middle school tier, and a high school tier. 3 times, and that makes them 27-hour-a-week employees. You had no idea I was going to start talking about that. But one school, one tier has to start at an early time for that to work. It becomes a mathematical equation. And really that mathematical equation runs out through the whole day, even all the way into the evening of homework time and everything else and activities after school. Right now, to change that, to just up and change it, there's really only one way we can do that without just flip-flopping, without just putting, let's say if we moved the middle school later, we have to put the high school earlier, which is not any, pardon me? Yeah, well, you know why they don't hear? Because a number of years ago, there was a pediatric study that said that's not good for high school age children, so schools adjusted. Then years later, now it's not good, and you've done research, I've done research. I always tell this story that when I did I tell this the other night? I think I did, so I'm sorry, that's a problem. Okay. But the first time I did doctoral research, I sat down and I brought a statistician in because I thought I was good at problem stats, but I wanted somebody that was really good at problem stats. And the first thing he asked me is, how do you want this to come out? Yeah, and that was a teachable moment for me. In all research and education is based, all research-based decisions are based on research. And a lot of times research is done to prove somebody's point. And so people get interested in that. There's a lot of parents that, as a father, my daughters always had 0 hours in their school system. My daughters, all through middle school and high schools, they were heavily involved in band. Their programs were before school. They went to school at 6:30 in the morning from middle school on. I hated it. But as a parent, I kind of bore the responsibility to make sure that I got them the sleep they needed. Did it work all the time? No, but I tried. Anyway, so we got to figure out. And we've got a study group right now that's going to look at this all next year to figure out how can we get a later start time, because I'm all for that in the middle school, but a way that works, that doesn't just switch this problem with that problem. And here's an idea. I want to think out of the box. I want to be innovative. And maybe instead of, and that's the other thing. The reason I mentioned the bus drivers, we just went to our own transportation system. If we don't have drivers for our transportation system, we don't have a transportation system. Fortunately, we've already hired almost very close to all the drivers we need. If we would go to a 2-tier system, they would no longer be 27-hour a week employees. In fact, we would have to hire more drivers to be on the road at the same time, but they would only have 2 tiers, which would drop a third of those 27 hours off, and we probably wouldn't have hired near the number that we did, because that would be significantly less hours to work. So, but what if, you know, we think out of the box, and what if we end up taking 2 of those tiers into secondary, and what if there is an early tier in our secondary schools and a late tier? For families that say, you know what, I like 7:30 start because happens to align when I go to work, my kid would be up anyway going to before school care or whatever. So it works. I'm not complaining about it. Don't change it. I hear that, you know. So maybe we could accommodate them, and maybe for parents that say, I want my kid up that early. Kids say, I want to get up that early. We can accommodate them later, and school just goes later into the day. You've got other complications with that when it comes into after-school activities, because then you've got, how do you do that with sports and things like that if you got kids ending later? But that's why we can't just make a decision right now and say, look, the superintendent doesn't like that early start time. He can just make a change, and fix. There's no way to fix it right now without thinking about other options, okay? And real quick, as I said, early release versus late start. School districts have just done different things a lot of times. A long time ago, we did early release like we do now. And I remember hearing complaints from the community that, you know, the community was having problems. Kids were hanging out in the restaurants and the stores, and it wasn't all that good, and sometimes getting into mischief. So a lot of school districts went to late starts, and we do a little bit of both. You know, our high schools do late starts. How many times a year do the high schools do? 16 times a year the high schools do late starts, and then we do, how many times do we do early release?
Once a month.
Is it once a month? Yeah. So it's a little bit of both, depending on the level that you're in, you know. But I'm sure before you graduate, there will be changes in that too, because we try to listen and we try to adjust. You haven't asked a question yet. You're not going to get off that easy. Make it a good one.
Let's see, I still like you to take geometry in the summer, so we can accelerate geometry and algebra at the same time. Okay.
Is there summer school in the summer?
Yes, there is summer school, but can I answer her question with your question, because yours is a good question, and that's, again, something that you're coming into Rockwood on the tails of some things. You know, a number of years back, I talked about that turbulence and budget cuts, and summer school really went only to remedial education, and we're slowly ramping that back up. And that is my goal, is that it should be that way. You know, it should be that way. Now, I still struggle back and forth philosophically with, is high school an 8-semester experience, and should it be an 8-semester experience for everybody? And if kids accelerate and then they hit a ceiling, do you let them go? Do you have early graduation? All those kinds of things. And I go back and forth on that, but I think I am for anything that removes ceilings for children in their learning, but we got a ways to go.
Because I was shocked that even when I grew up in public schools, and I was shocked here when I said, okay, well, I want to take algebra too,
Yeah.
and geometry at the same time. And that was 30 years ago. I was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I went to a district, which I did go to district. That's what I did when I got here. But I'm like, why can't you just take it? Why can't you take 2 maths if it's your elective? Why is that such a big deal if I want, as an extra elective, to take an extra math as a freshman? So those kind of paradigms, I was thinking, really, again, the thought process of it can't be done differently, and the rejection of the idea that people come from different perspectives and come from different, oh my God, taking algebra and 2 and geometry, we did that 30 years ago.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? They doing tech. I mean, I'm saying, these are things that, again, this whole paradigm, how this operates. So why it's just a why?
Yeah,
They're totally
yeah.
different courses.
The more and more you talk, the more and more I realize we have a lot of the same feelings about things. But hey, in the 70s, a lot of times elementary schools taught French, you know? But you get it's like anything, you get out of the mode of something in a public funded entity, and when you're driven by the politics of, you get into these, I don't want to call them ruts, but because that's real negative sounding, but you get into these boxes or these silos, and getting out of them takes major paradigm shifts. And there's two ways to create a paradigm shift. I say this to my staff all the time. One is I can beat people into submission, by just telling them, this is the way we're going to do it, you better like it, and I don't care if you agree with it, we're doing it. You may get where you're trying to go in a matter of years, but you get there with a lot of people kicking and screaming and a lot of negativity, and that's bad for climate. You can't have bad climate in schools. Or you can get there by starting the conversation, perpetuating the conversation, looking for those examples, cataloging those examples. Again, we talk a lot about experiential learning, and we are in the process of cataloging all the different examples of experiential learning. And we hope, it's my goal, by highlighting what we have, bringing the conversation to the forefront, examining what other places have, exploring where we can go, that we will significantly change that in a pretty quick amount of time. But we have to have that conversation. But all of those things, I agree. Summer school needs to be rich with opportunities for kids, and there should be no ceilings, and we should never hold a kid back who wants to come in and say, here's what I want to do. If that's not going to be detrimental to a child, why wouldn't we let them do it? But we've got systems, and we just got to get beyond those systems. And my theory about Rockwood with systems, this is not a bad thing. I talk a lot, don't I?
No,
Yeah. My theory about systems, when you have a large school district, a large metropolitan school district like you do, regardless, whether it's something like St. Louis City or Hazelwood up north or us or Parkway, over the years, to be organized, you have to have policies and systems. And over time, as you practice those things, and I think they're good to establish organization in the district, but you become very rigid with those policies. And that's kind of, as I've been back in Rockwood for 2 years, I've really tried to soften that. Our departments, just for the years, not being mean or bad or anything like that, but usually it's look at the policy book. If it doesn't say we do it that way, it's no, I'm sorry, we don't do it that way. And we're trying to be more inclusive.
I was going to say, I would totally encourage just looking at that, and there's been a lot of examples with our experience where it is, well, it's just not done.
We don't do it that way.
Or we already did it, and I'm like, what do you mean you already made a decision about why wasn't I called? And in 3 cases I can give where my input would have really changed, and ultimately what I thought, I don't know everything, I'm not the parent that has all the answers, I don't, but I want to be consulted.
Sure,
Versus, well, we take the test, we do this is where your kid goes.
Right.
Well, what's on the test? And so she's missed questions, whatever, and she'll come home, I'm like, I knew that answer, and it's cleared up in 5 seconds. And it's like, but we've already determined and you're just like, what?
Yeah.
So, and,
It's part of that rigid model of the testing model that we talked about. It just infiltrates everything we do and think. But I'm happy to tell all of you that I really have seen good movement in that in the last couple of years. But I just can't flip a switch and change that, overnight. But we do. I mean, even everything to do with, our human resources department, even internally, when people call and ask a question about their contract or this. They're used to, sometimes they're afraid to call, not because they're mean people, but because they're afraid of what they're going to hear. It's going to be a very, definitive, this is yes, this is no, we can this, we can't that, versus let's examine that.
yeah.
Let's examine that.
And kind of it trickles down too, when all the tax issues would come up, it kind of, just positive, feedback. But when you get it, you think, well, if my opinion's not valued, if I don't have a say in what's going on, even down to what's going on with my kid, why am I giving you more money? I mean, that, and not that I would vote no or something, but that's the initial thought that I would have to battle. It's like, as a parent, you wanting more, but my kid's not, my experience, it's not measuring. And there's a lot, I mean, I know building needs this, but just as a parent, then that's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's
What
like,
school
oh,
you go to?
Chocolate Valley.
Rockland Valley, okay.
So just one of those that, it just, you want to feel heard.
Sure.
I guess.
Sure.
So just, and it's not all, it's not like.
Oh, no, I
can't
get it.
believe I don't
No,
want
you're
you to
very
hear
reasonable
that.
in what you're saying,
I
yeah.
really don't want you to hear that.
I'm
Just
not.
if you're saying that's a direction we want to move, I'm saying,
Yeah.
yeah, this is how I think a
Absolutely.
lot of parents would take that is this is good versus student number what, your student number 130, here's the answer, or here's your form letter. The absences, I know this spits it out. I got the absence letter the day we found out she's going to be hospitalized with pneumonia because she got a secondary bacterial infection. And then you get the letter in the mailbox. If we miss one more, we reserve the right. And I'm like, you don't know what's going on with me. If I
Yeah.
just got back from the hospital because she
I
was
know.
admitted. And that's when and I understand it has to happen. And there again.
It's just
states
automated.
that-
It's-
Right.
And it's because what we're required to do, and it's
By
back, I mean,
state, it's a federal, I get it.
we're accredited by attendance. You know, we have to have
Which is, should not be.
better than 90%
should not
attendance,
be.
90% of the time.
And the
you know.
parents, and that it just, so there's a lot of system things that you don't have control over, but as a parent getting that letter, that's their experience.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how do you make the two together? And
Yeah, and that is tough. What I hope the answer to that is that even if the automated system has to be there, when you connect, especially with the principal, it amazes me how many people in Rockwood call me and they haven't even talked, they've never had a sit down with the building principal. And they say, well, I talked to that assistant principal. Okay, assistant principal is kind of a principal in training, and not that they don't do good work, but I mean, the ultimate person that's running that building is the principal. And every parent should have direct contact in a comfortable relationship with that principal. And I encourage all parents to do that, to go in and sit down and get to know the principal, because what should happen, you very understandably on a frustrating, stressful day with your child, you see that in your mailbox. I don't know that we can stop the automated things from happening because that's a big system. But you know what? But that's my point, though. I would hope, though, that when you did call, you got something very warm on the other side saying, please don't worry about that. We will take care of that. I don't want you stressing over that. Take care of your daughter. Get her feeling better. We can absolve that. That's what we need here. Not, well, your kid had her wisdom teeth taken out or whatever, but it's too bad. That's the way it is.
Or just some way too, like if there can be that personal touch with a counselor. I've noticed, or I think it's okay. How's it go? An email. I know it can't be a personal phone call. And I'm not saying that has to happen or that's the standard. I'm just saying as a citizen, when I get a newsletter, we did the football field, we did that, I go, it's great, but do you care about me and my kid, or is she student number whatever in this school? I'm just saying, that's the kind of feeling
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, and if there's any way I can fix that, please tell me, because that's not, we don't think of kids as numbers.
And I don't want to communicate that I
Yeah.
angrily think that, and that it's just kind of one of those, I wish there was more. That's a better way to say that. It's kind of
Yeah.
that, I wish there was more. I wish there was one high school, 3 elementary schools, I mean, parents might, that, but
Yeah.
I just want to communicate, it's not an anger, oh my goodness. I
Okay,
can't
well,
believe
thank
it."
you. But I don't want you feeling that way, so we need to keep thinking about how we can get you not feeling that way.
Another parent committee. I'm just-
Yeah. Any last thoughts? It's about 8:30.
Well, if we go another half hour, we can change the whole district.
Yeah.
No, I think these are very important, and I definitely think that we should have a town hall meeting with the kids and rally all the children from all the schools to come out one night and just kind of ask you questions. We do this 3 or 4 times a year. Maybe it's a town hall meeting for kids night or whatever, try to get just them more engaged in this process and just again understanding
of kind of how things really work
Yeah.
behind, after they leave the desk work to make sure.
If I thought kids would come out at night, I would do that. I'm not so sure they would. So
Pizza.
I go where they're
You
at.
know, and you're gonna have to have a PTA.
I try to be-
And a tax dollars paying for it, but I'm not.
I try to be pretty visible with the
It's
kids so
cool,
they know who
yeah.
I am. We're 22,000 kids, and one of my goals coming in was that in a quick time frame, I wanted the kids to know who their superintendent was. And you may be amazed how many kids, as I went around to schools, didn't even know what a superintendent was, much less who that person was. So I try to continue ramping up that visibility where every week I'm going to 3 schools, and I'm not leaving the school until I've been in every classroom.
And that's noticed.
Thank you. But the idea is to get kids more and more, accessible to that. I was at Rockwood Summit today where they had their academic assembly, which is a very cool thing. And, you feel good when kids are coming up and speaking to you on the way out. And kids do find a voice. I have advisories at all 4 of the high schools where I go around and meet with kids that they rotate in and out. But I continue to try to ramp up those things. If I thought a bunch of kids would come out for an evening meeting, I'd do them, but I don't think they won't. Maybe we'll get there. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you very, very much.